Hello, it's your host, Adam Jones, the Archaic Reader. Today we have a short story called Terry Dolan from Stories and Sketches by H.S. Caswell. Without further ado, Terry Dolan. Some years since circumstances caused me to spend the summer months in a farming district a few miles from the village of E, and it was there I met with Terry Dolan. He had a short time previously come over from Ireland and was engaged as a sort of chore boy by Mr. L, in whose family I resided during my stay in the neighborhood. This Terry was the oddest being with whom I ever chanced to meet. Would that I could describe him, but most of us, I believe, occasionally meet with people whom we find to be indescribable, and Terry was one of those. He called himself 16 years of age, but, excepting that he was low of stature, you would about as soon to have taken him for 60 as 16. His countenance looked anything but youthful, and there was altogether a sort of queer, ancient look about him, which caused him to appear very remarkable. When he first came to reside with Mr. L, the boys in the neighborhood nicknamed him the little old man, but they soon learned by experience that their wisest plan was to place a safe distance between Terry and themselves before applying that name to him, for the implied taunt regarding his peculiar appearance enraged him beyond measure whenever he entered the room, especially if he ventured a remark. And no matter how serious you might have been a moment before, the laugh would come. Do your best to repress it. When I first became an inmate with the family, I was too often inclined to laugh at the oddities of Terry, and I believe a much graver person than I was at the time would have done the same. But after a time, when I learned something of his past life, I regarded him with a feeling of pity, although to avoid laughing at him at times were next to impossible. One evening in midsummer, I found him seated alone upon the piazza, with a most dejected countenance. Taking a seat by his side, I inquired why he looked so sad. His eyes filled with tears as he replied, "It's of old Ireland I'm thinking to-night, sure." I had never before seen Terry look sober, and I felt a deep sympathy for the homesick boy. I asked him how it happened that he left all his friends in Ireland and came to this country alone. From his reply, I learned that his mother died when he was only 10 years old, and also that his father soon after married a second wife, who, to use Terry's own words, bait him unmercifully. "It is a wonder," said he, "that I lived to grow up at all, wid all de battins I got from that cruel woman, and all the times she sent me to bed without iver a bite of supper. Bad luck to her and the like of her." He did live, however, but he certainly did not grow up to be very tall. "Times grew worse and worse for me at home," continued he, "and a square time have I had of it till I was 14 years of age, when one day I says to myself, flesh and blood, I can bear it no longer, and I ran away to the city of Dublin, where an aunt by me mother's side lived. Me aunt was a poor woman, but she gave a warm welcome to her sister's motherless boy. She treated me kindly and allowed me to share her home, although she could ill afford it, till I got to a place as sarvant in a gentleman's family. As for me father, he niver troubled his head about me any more. Indeed, I think he was glad to be rid of me, and all by manes of that wicked woman. It was near 2 years after I left home that I took the notion of going to Ameriky. Me aunt advised me against going, but when she saw me mind was set on it, she consented, and did her best, poor woman, to send me away looking decent and respectable. I never saw me father or me stepmother again. I had no wish to see her, but although I knew me father no longer loved me, I had some natural like feelings for him, but as I had run away from home, I durst not go back, and so I left Ireland without a sight of him. But I could have not lave it forever, as it might be, without one more sight of me mother's grave. I reached the small village where me father lived about nightfall, and lodged in the house of a kind of neighbor who befriended me, and he promised at my earnest wish to say nothing to any one of my visit. Early in the morning, before anyone was astir in the village, I stole away to the churchyard where they buried me mother. I knelt down, I did, and kissed the sods which covered a grave, and prayed that the blessing which she pronounced before she died, with her hand resting on me, might follow me wherever I might go. The boy took from his pocket a small parcel, carefully enclosed in paper, which he handed to me, saying, I gathered these shamrocks from off me mother's grave before I left it forever. My own eyes grew moist as I gazed upon the now withered shamrock leaves which the poor boy prized so highly. Would that they had proved as a talisman to guard him from evil. I listened with much interest to Terry's story till our conversation was suddenly interrupted by Mr. Blank calling him, in no very gentle tones, to go and drive home the cows from the far pasture. To reach this pasture, he must needs pass through about 1/4 of a mile of thick woods. He had a great dread of walking alone in the woods, which his imagination filled with wild animals. When he returned that evening he seemed very much terrified, and when questioned as to the cause, he replied that he had met a wild beast in the woods, and was killed entirely with the fright of it. We endeavored to gain from him a description of the animal he had seen, but for some time were unable. What color was the animal? Inquired Mrs. Blank. Indeed, ma'am, and it's just the color of a dog he was, answered Terry. This reply was greeted with a burst of laughter from all present, at which he was highly offended. In order to pacify him, I said, we would not laugh at you, Terry, only that the dogs are of so many different colors that we are as much in the dark as ever regarding the color of the animal you saw. Well, then, replied he, if you must know, he was a dirty brown, the varmint that he was. From what we could learn from him, we were led to suppose that he had met with one of those harmless little creatures called the woodchuck, which his nervous terror, aided by the deepening twilight, had magnified into a formidable wild beast. A few evenings after, 2 or 3 friends of the family chanced to call, and in course of conversation, someone mentioned an encampment of Indians who had recently located themselves in our vicinity for the purpose of gathering material for the manufacture of baskets and other works of Indian handicraft. Terry had never seen an Indian, and curiosity, not unmixed with fear, was excited in his mind. When he learned that a number of those dark people were within 3 miles of us, he asked many questions regarding their personal appearance, habits, and etc. It was evident that he entertained some very comical ideas upon the subject. After sitting for a time silent, he suddenly inquired, Do they eat praties like other people? A lady, present, in order to impose upon his credulity, replied, Indeed, Terry, they not only eat potatoes, but they sometimes eat people. His countenance expressed much alarm, as he replied, Fake's thin, but I'll keep out of their way. After a short time, he began to suspect they were making a game of him, and applied to me for information, saying, Tell me, sir, if what Mrs. Blank says is true. Do not be alarmed, Terry, I replied, for if you live till the Indians eat you, you will look even older than you now do. This allusion to his ancient appearance was very mischievous on my part, and I regretted it a moment after. But he was so much pleased to learn that he had nothing to fear from the Indians that he readily forgave me for alluding to a subject upon which he was usually very sensitive. I remember taking a walk one afternoon during the haymaking season to the field where Terry was at work. Mr. Blank had driven to the village with the farm horses, leaving Terry to draw in hay with the rheumatic old animal that was well nigh unfit for use. But as the hay was in good condition for getting in, and the sky betokened rain, he told Terry, upon leaving home, to accomplish as much as possible during his absence, and he would, if the rain kept off, draw in the remainder upon his return. As I drew nigh, I spied Terry perched upon the top of a load of hay, holding the reins and urging forward the horse in the ascent of a very steep hill. First, he tried coaxing, and as that proved of little avail, he tried the effect of a few vigorous strokes with a long switch which he carried in his hand. When the poor old horse had dragged the heavy load about halfway up the hill, he seemed incapable of further exertion, and horse, cart, Terry, and all began a rapid backward descent down the hill. Here the boy's patience gave way entirely. "Musha thin, bad luck to ye for one harse," said he as he applied the switch with renewed energy. Just then I arrived within speaking distance and said, "Do you think, Terry, you would be any better off if you had two of them?" "Not if they were both like this one," answered he. I advised Terry to come down from his elevated position and not add his weight to the load drawn by the overburdened animal. He followed my advice, and when with some difficulty we had checked the descending motion of the cartwheels, we took a fair start, and the summit of the hill was finally gained. "It's often," said Terry, "that I've seen a horse draw a cart, but I never before saw a cart drawing a horse." There was one trait in the character of the boy which pleased me much. He was very grateful for any little act of kindness. He often got into difficulties with the family, owing to his rashness and want of consideration, and I often succeeded in smoothing down for him many rough places in his daily path. And when he observed that I interested myself in his behalf, his gratitude knew no bounds. I believe he would have made almost any sacrifice to please me. He surprised me one day by saying suddenly, "Don't I wish you'd only be took sick?" "Why, Terry," replied I am surprised indeed that you should wish evil to me." "Indeed, then," answered he, "it is not for evil that I wish it, but for your good, just to let ye see how tenderly I would take care of ye." I thanked him for his kind intentions, saying that I was very willing to take the will for the deed in this case, and had no wish to test his kindness by a fit of sickness. He came in one evening fatigued with a hard day's work, and retired early to bed. His sleeping apartment adjoined the sitting room. I had several letters to write, which occupied me till a late hour. The family had all retired. I finished writing just as the clock struck 12. At that moment I was almost startled by Terry's voice singing in a very high key. My first thought was that he had gone suddenly crazy. With a light in my hand, I stepped softly into the room to find Terry sitting up in a bed and singing at the top of his voice a song in the native Irish tongue. By this time he had roused everyone in the house, and others of the family entered the room. By the pauses which he made, we knew when he had reached the end of each verse. He sang several verses. At the time, I knew how many, but I am unable now to recall the exact number. He must surely have been a sound sleeper, or the loud laughter which filled the room would have waked him. For the scene was ludicrous in the extreme. Terry sitting up in bed, sound asleep, at the hour of midnight, and singing, with a loud voice, in a very earnest manner, to an audience who were unable to understand one word of the song. At the close of the last verse he lay quietly down, all unconscious of the musical entertainment he had given. The next morning some of the family began teasing him about the song he had sung in his sleep. He was loth to believe them, and as usual inquired of me if they were telling him the truth. "I'll believe whatever you say," said he, "for it's you that never told me a lie yet." "You may believe them this time," said I, "for you certainly did sing a song. The air was very fine, and I have no doubt the words were equally so, if we could only have understood them." "Well then," replied he, "but I never heard more than that, and if I r'ally did sing, I might as well tell ye how it happened. I dreamed, ye see, that I was a ball in Ireland, and I thought that about 12 o'clock we got tired with dancing, and sated ourselves on the benches were arranged round the walls of the room, and each one was to sing a song in their turn, and it's I that thought my turn had come for sure." "Well, Terry," said I, "you hit upon the time exact at any rate, for it was just 12 o'clock when you favored us with the song." Soon after this time I left the neighborhood and removed to some distance. Terry remained for considerable time with the same family. After a time I learned that he had obtained employment in a distant village. The next tidings I heard of him was that he had been implicated in a petty robbery and had run away. His impulsive disposition rendered him very easy of persuasion for either good or evil, and he seldom paused to consider the consequences of any act. From what I could learn of the matter, it seemed he had been enticed into the affair by some designing fellows, who judged that, Owing to his simplicity, he would be well adapted to carry out their wicked plans, and when suspicion was excited, they managed in some way to throw all the blame upon Terry, who, fearing an arrest, fled no one knew whither. Many years have passed since I saw or heard of Terry Dolan, but often as memory recalls past scenes and those who participated in them, I think of him and wonder if he is yet among the living, and, if so, in what quarter of the world he has fixed his abode. The end. If you enjoyed this, you could like and subscribe. More stories are coming. You don't have to. Nobody's forcing your hand. But if you like them, you can. So that's my pitch. See you tomorrow.